Hi, my name is Susan Yearwood, and I am a literary agent based in London. This is a book launch for one of my authors, Reid, whose debut novel, Guinevere, The Dragon Ring, is out now, published by Dragonblade Publishing. Phil writes historical romances with an emphasis on the historical, with a speculative element, time travel. She has written 3 books in this series. The remaining 2, Guinevere the Bear and Guinevere the Sword, are to be published in March and May this year respectively. Phil lives on a wide beam boat on the Kennet and Avon Canal with her husband and rescue dog and cat. Emily E.K. Murdoch is also joining us to interview Phil. Emily is a USA Today bestselling author of historical romance. From medieval to Western to Regency, Emily brings her readers along on emotional roller coasters with, of course, happy endings. When not writing, Emily lives just outside Bath, England, and tries to prevent herself from buying another sword. I'll now introduce you to Phil, who will talk about her debut novel a little and the inspiration around this. And here's Phil.
Hello. Guinevere the Dragon Ring was born about 20 years ago when my husband took me to see Glastonbury Tor. I'd seen it many times before, but it was the first time we ever went there together. When we got there, we parked around the back and we walked a lot through the field towards the steep path that goes up the back of the Tor. And when we stopped halfway, my husband took a series of photographs on motor drive, and he'd loaded the camera. This is the days before he had digital film anyway, digital camera. It was using film. He'd loaded it up with infrared film, which is very, very sensitive, so you have to be careful what you do with it. Anyway, he took 4 photographs on motor drive. When he came home that evening, we didn't see anything untoward, but when we came home that evening, he developed the film and he looked at the negatives. And in the first photograph, you can see the hump of the Tor with its ruined church tower. There's only the tower of the church left on the top. In the second photograph, the tower is fading. And in the third photograph, there is no tower. Fourth photograph, the tower is back. I mean, these were literally taken probably within a couple of seconds because it was motor drive. And I looked at it and I thought he had it checked to see if anything had happened. And I think it was Kodak had a look at it for him. And his father was an optical physicist and he had a look too. And he said, no, nothing's happened. That is something that the camera picked up that you didn't see. And I wondered if it was a glimpse back to the Tor in the time before the tower was on top of it. And then I wondered what would happen if you were in the tower when that happened. Anyway, I didn't do anything about it for about another 15 years. Children and horses and things like that. And then I decided I was going to write a story centered around that and about what would happen if you were in the tower in that moment when there was a tear in time, and it would tumble you back, I would tumble my heroine back in time into the Dark Ages.
Wonderful. That sounds fantastic. Emily, could you now speak to Phil and
Absolutely. Now, for those who don't know me, Phil and I
research great.
Oh, got a bit of a lag there. I'm going to keep calm and carry on because, as you can tell from my accent, I am proud of our approach. So Phil and I met on a live video to celebrate book launches about a week and a half ago. And one of the things that we bonded over was our love of medieval history. I have an MA in medieval studies, and so as soon as I was hearing more about Phil's story, I absolutely knew we had to catch up. And Phil, it's very well known, even by those who don't, consider themselves historians, that it's quite difficult to find evidence about Arthur and his court of Camelot. So how did you approach researching your book and making sure it's really historically accurate?
Well, I began researching it probably when I was about 18 or 19. I was at university and I can remember sitting in the library when I was supposed to be researching geography because I was going to be a geography teacher. And I was researching King Arthur instead.
We've all done it. We've all done it.
Of course, in those days it was books. You had to look in all the books, but nowadays you can do it online. You don't even have to buy a book. You can get an e-book just straight to your Kindle. Although I have to say I prefer physical books. So I read a lot of books. I think I must have read almost every textbook there is on King Arthur. And I have a big collection of books, but I like to use the nearest writers you can get And the nearest one you can get is Gildas, but of course he famously doesn't mention King Arthur. So I had great fun finding a reason why he doesn't, because he's in my books. He's in there as a character, a minor character. I think he's in book 3, he'll turn up in, but he's in other books as well.
Don't tease me.
But also I go and visit lots of the sites. I've been to Tintagel, Castle Dor, the Tristan Stone, Dimilioch. Dimilioch is amazing. Have you ever been to Dimilioch, Emily?
No, I'm a Brit and I've never heard of that place or thing.
Well, it's where, you know, when the story about when Arthur was conceived, when Eutha Pendragon wanted to marry someone else's wife, and he went down and she was locked in Tintagel, and the husband was defending another of his fortresses, which was Dimilioch. And of course, this is only the legend. This isn't in my book, because it's also the pre-story. Eutha asks Merlin to transform him into the form of the husband. So because he looks like the husband, he goes into Tintagel, manages to sleep with Igraine, and Arthur is born. Meanwhile, the husband is killed at Dimilioch, which is
basically convenient, isn't it?
Yeah. So in the morning, news comes: the king is dead. Well, it's not the king; it's the Duke of Cornwall. The Duke is dead. The Duke is dead. And she's like, "No, he's sleeping beside me." Anyway, I found Dimilioch. It's a little town, little village, really, in Cornwall, called St. Denis, and the churchyard is right on the fortress, and it's amazing. There's a farm down the road called Dimilioch Farm, or Dimilioch Farm, I think. So the name is still there as well. But the churchyard has got the most massive stone walls around the outside of it. It's just, if you ever go to Cornwall, go and see it.
See, I love that. I mean, I'm a historian by trade and a storyteller by craft, and this idea of myths and legends and history kind of all combining, for me is just so fascinating. But I think, you know, Phil, you and I have this rather unusual for historical romance authors benefit of actually living in England. So you're able to go to these places and actually walk along the walls and look at the views and try to imagine. Was that quite evocative, you know, to actually go to these places?
Yes, I like to go and see the places where my characters stand. I like to look at the view. I know it's not the same view, but ostensibly it's the same view. You just have to imagine all the modern things out of it, and imagine there's woodland and heathland instead of cultivated fields, or you imagine the fields are smaller. Last year we went to Hadrian's Wall, and we had quite an interesting experience there, because we went to a place called Castle 42, and my husband he's now got his digital camera, and he took a lot of photographs, I mean hundreds, maybe thousands, while we were on holiday, because we went to lots of different places. And when he was looking through the photographs afterwards, there was a picture of me with the dogs leaning against the wall, and further back there's a person on the horizon. Now Patrick's one of these, he's a bit fussy about it, and he won't take a photograph with a stranger in the background. He blew it up. It's only a Roman soldier. So we googled it. Ghosts of Hadrian's Wall, Castle 42. It's even got a name. It's called Lucius.
And this is one of the amazing benefits of being in England and, well, Britain, I suppose, to go to beyond that. You know, I think there we go. There's my Geoffrey of Monmouth study edition, which has all my post-it notes in for Arthur of Britain, because he's one of my faves. But you know, we're able to go and actually, you know, drink the waters where they drank, and it brings you closer to history, I think, in a way that unfortunately just reading a book simply doesn't make it possible to do. But I guess, you know, touching on that research you've done, you said, you know, you're reading all these books. How hard was it to write your own Arthurian legend? Because there's not only so many great textbooks and, you know, historical people who've written about him, but, you know, there's been so many modern retellings. I use modern with massive scare quotes. You know, the last kind of 200-300 years, we come back and back again and again to Arthur and his Arthurian legend. How difficult was it for you to kind of love what's come before, but actually do something quite different?
Well, I do make a point of not reading any Arthurian fiction, just in case it influences me. The last Arthurian fiction book I read was Mary Stuart, and I don't think I read all of them.
That's fine. That's the best one other than yours. So that's fine.
Because I think I don't want to be given ideas. I have seen that terrible film with Keira Knightley. The one where they make him into Artorius Castus. Totally rubbish.
I avoided it completely, I'm going to be honest.
And I saw the occasional episode or bits of episodes when they did the Merlin series on television as well. But I didn't like that either. And they're living in a stone castle.
I'm gonna put my bad historian hat on. I loved it only because it was my generation. It came out when I was a teen, late teen, so it was like perfectly pitched for me at that age. But I have watched it since, and I cringe now when I look at certain bits, or I think, what, no, and then I have to turn it off.
Definitely not. Although the Merlin in my book is not an old greybeard, he's a young contemporary of King Arthur. They start off in their 20s in book 1, their early 20s. I tried to make them as young as possible without making them teenage. And Merlin is pretty much the same age, although it turns out he's not, because there is an element of magic in the story. And as Gwen says at some point in the story, if you have magic, why wouldn't you want to look young? I mean, you wouldn't want to look like an old greybeard, would you?
I mean.
Although at some point, I was going to say, at some point, he does actually end up looking much older than he is because he's very depressed.
Oh no, very Howl from Howl's Moving Castle. That's a Studio Ghibli shout out. If anyone gets that reference, brilliant. If not, that's fine. So are you kind of cherry picking parts of the legends that you love and then running with them, or are you taking bits that you don't like and changing them to be more like how you would want them to be?
A mixture of both, because in book 1, you see, Gwen knows all these legends because her father is an Arthurian, well, was, because he's dead, an Arthurian scholar. So she's grown up with him reading the Arthurian tales, and he's pretty he's read every story to her. He's read the later medieval romances. He's read her the Celtic legends. So she's had a lot read to her as a child. So she's very aware of what could happen, but she doesn't know if it will, because of course we don't know any of the history. It's all just stories, really. So I have used Nennius's 12 battles, which you'd be pleased to hear.
Wow, got to get those historian points in there, Phil.
Well, I think people who know about Arthur come to expect things. I mean, there's a round table, but it's not quite the round table you'd expect, because Gwen goes to Veraconium, Roxeter, and I've been there as well. And there's apparently, with my research, I found that they built, on the forum, they constructed an enormous wooden hall, a bit like a market hall. So I thought, right, that's where they have the Council of Kings. And when she goes into the Council of Kings, there's the round table. And then the other thing she does, she's pretty annoyed because Merlin says she's supposed to be marrying Prince Arthur, and that by doing this, she will make him the king he's meant to be. He will be great. He'll become the High King. And she says, no. You make him into the king he's going to be, because you stick a sword in a stone and only he can pull it out. So Merlin does that, and she's made the legend become real. So I can do things like that because she knows, so she can tell Merlin, or she can tell people. As we go further on, she actually confides a little bit more in Arthur. Arthur does find out where she's from, and she confides more and more in him, and she confides more and more in Merlin as well, because she's very worried about Medrout.
Well, yes, no spoilers here. This is a spoiler-free zone, but
yeah.
I mean, were you kind of chuckling or cackling at your keyboard as you wrote those moments? Because I can, they're funny. See, I don't want to ruin it if people haven't read the book. Go and read the book, then come back. I still will try and keep it spoiler-free. There are some bits in there that as a reader, are genuinely funny. Did you find yourself cackling as you wrote?
Yes, I did.
Good. I think you've
enjoyed writing them. I like writing a little bit of humour in. I don't like it when it gets too serious. Like, I like the fact that Gwen, because she knows all these things and she can make rude comments. For example, when she first arrives there, she's very wet and she has to undress, and there's a maid helping her undress. And because she's been away with her boyfriend for the weekend to scatter her father's ashes, she invests in some nice red lacy underwear. When she takes her clothes off, the maid is absolutely horrified. She's never seen lacy bra and panties before. Not to mention, Gwen's got a Brazilian.
But this is one of the fun things about time slip historical romances. They're and I've never written one because I don't think I'm up for the challenge, to be perfectly honest, because it is a challenge. You're mixing this modern day character that's interacting with a very historical setting. What kind of basics of modern life did you have the most fun researching in the kind of much earlier centuries? Something as simple as brushing your teeth.
Yeah. I looked that one up and it's charcoal, powdered charcoal. You cannot imagine that would make your teeth nice. So actually later on I added powdered dried mint leaves in. I thought that might make you a bit better. I'm not sure if that one was genuine, but I thought Gwen might like it. And babies' nappies. Oh my God. Apparently you use rabbit skins for babies' nappies. And I was thinking, Gwen actually thinks this, which way out? Because if you put furry side in would be disgusting to clean, wouldn't it?
I don't want to speculate. I think we need some real life archaeological role play here. I think you need to go out tomorrow, Phil, and you need to try this out. You need to see.
My daughter's expecting a baby in the end of April. Maybe I'll get her some rabbit skins.
I mean, research. It's very important. Very, very important.
Indeed. That's great. That's fantastic. Lovely to hear all about how you thought about your first novel and researched it. Just a couple of questions from the chat room. How did you come up with the clever idea of mixing time travel with the legends of King Arthur, Phil?
Well, it was because I'd had that experience in the tower. Well, I didn't have the experience in the tower. Patrick had the experience with taking the photograph. That made me think about the time travel aspect of it. And King Arthur is my obsession because I'm a Spurgers. I only found that out when I was an adult. And it explained to me an awful lot of things. Because apparently the other thing, women with Asperger's who are very frequently not diagnosed because it doesn't show in women so much, can have obsessions with horses, which is my other obsession. But since I was a child, I'd been obsessed with King Arthur, and a long time ago, I tried to write a sort of biopic of him, and I just wanted to write it from the point of view of a woman. So I did start once writing it from the point of view of his mother, and I was going to include various women in his life, and then I thought, no, I shall write it from Gwen's point of view, but I shall write it from my point of view as if I was Gwen, which basically is how I've done it.
Great, lovely. Another question. Was Lucius the ghost the only ghost you have encountered? And can we expect to see one related to Gwen?
No, I saw a ghost in a churchyard, just in Newbury, actually. It was Speen Church. And I went there with my son, who is obsessed with churches. It was a few years ago now. And the church was locked, so we went there on our bicycles. And we walked around the outside of the church, because I quite like looking at graveyards. And when we came back towards the gate, there was this old lady there. Clearly, she looked like anybody. She's just like a real person. And she had a turquoise kind of pack-a-mac thing on, like old ladies wear, and fluffy, whitey grey hair around her head. And she just walked down, and I was looking at there was a big tree next to me, and I was looking at the graves under the tree and things like that. And then we got to the gate, which was quite close, and I looked down the front of the church, and I said, "Where'd that old lady go?" And Jake said to me, "What old lady?" So he went around the church again to see if she was outside, because we knew she wasn't inside, because the door was locked. No sign of her. Anyway, when we got home, we Googled it just out of curiosity. Blow me, it's on Wikipedia, and she's grey with a turquoise Mac. Really? Yeah.
I love that about England. You can't sneeze round here for running into a ghost story. You really can't.
Yeah, I like ghost stories. There is kind of some more supernatural as it goes on through the books, because King Arthur does involve quite a lot of the supernatural. I did think long and hard about putting Excalibur in it, because the Sword in the Stone is not Excalibur. There's two different sword stories, and the Sword in the Stone is different to Excalibur, which is the Lady in the Lake story. Patrick came up with the idea for that, so I won't tell you what that is, but there's still some supernatural to it, but it's not quite as you'd expect.
And the last question, or second from last, would you sacrifice some real history to fit the story or a specific scene?
What I did with stirrups, because stirrups didn't come to Britain until about the 7th century, I don't think. And we're talking into the 5th century here. But of course, Gwen goes back and she discovers they've got saddles which are rather like Roman army saddles, which have 4 horns, 2 at the back and 2 at the front, which is very handy to hang things from. And they kind of, when you sit on a Roman army saddle, the horns come together a little bit when you put your weight in between them, and they do wedge you in, but they have no stirrups. And of course, Gwen, she's a rider, she's used to stirrups, and so she gets them to make her some. And then everybody has them, because if you've got stirrups, when you're fighting, you can stand in your stirrups, you can lean over to one side, You can do an awful lot more manoeuvring on your horse than you can when you've got no stirrups, as Di will know because she's a rider.
The number one thing I see in historicals that are a little bit more medieval side that I can see someone's just given in because they can't do any scene without them is forks. The fork was invented in Italy and came to Britain in about the 1400s, but almost every medieval romance or medieval fiction book that I read has forks because it is so messy to describe a meal scene without forks. You spend half of your scene explaining why they're not using forks and it's just not worth it. So people just bung them in and I'm all for that. It's just too much hassle without them.
There's no forks in my books.
There's no forks in mine, but I can understand why people are like, oh gosh, I could spend half this chapter trying to explain the history of the fork, or I could just put a fork in and continue on with the plot.
Gwen looks at Merlin when he's eating. The first meal she has there, she looks to see how he's managing his food because all she's got is a knife. Although, when we were at the Roman Army Museum on Hadrian's Wall, there was a really good video that you could sit and watch, and it showed the men working on the soldiers who were patrolling the wall, and they had the teeniest little spoons, like a mustard spoon almost. They were tiny, and they were eating food with a little spoon. No forks.
Yes, of course. Emily, would you like to ask a little more about the future of
I really do.
Series? Yeah.
Really do. Okay, so again, Phil, try not to spoil us, okay? Because I'm assuming that everyone who's watching this video has now gone away, paused this video, gone away, voraciously read your first book and come back. So we don't want to be spoiled for the rest of the series, but we do want to have some teasers. So this is book one of a series.
Yeah.
How have you managed to plan out a timeline for what is such a sprawling epic?
Well, at the end of book one, we leave her on the tour, and we don't know whether she's got back to Arthur. Well, there's 5 more books, so she does. I don't think that's a spoiler. I'm not writing about her being a librarian back with her boyfriend in a little semi in wherever she lives. So she does come back, and she does stay there most of the time. And yeah, and when I started it, when I won the competition, I'd got 2 books ready, and they said, "Oh, you need 3 books." So in the interval between, I heard I won on the July the 1st, and I think they got back in touch at the beginning of August. I wrote book 3. So that they covered 3 years basically. So it was a year per book, and I thought, well, this is no good. Otherwise, I'll be 20 books to this. Plus, I mean, there's a lot of material with Arthur, but it's not quite that much. So I decided that with the 4th, 5th, and 6th books, which I've got, I'm just revising book 5 at the moment, that I would leap forward in time with some little bits of backstory for the intervening bits. But I've tried to model it around the battles, but tried not to make the battles too important, because here's a woman telling the story, and it's very hard to get a woman present at battles. It's very difficult, and also to make the battles different, because I think my battles aren't too bad, and I've tried to make them different each time, but I am a woman writing about battles, and it's quite difficult.
I can imagine.
A little more about the competition that you were part of, and because you just mentioned it, and I thought maybe you'd like to say a little more about it.
Yeah, okay. It's run by Dragon Blade Publishing, and it was the inaugural year last year. Well, the entries opened in September 2020, so it's on at the moment for the 2nd year. If anybody's out there who is already a historical romance writer, because it's just for historical romance books, please enter, because it was very much worth it my while entering, although I didn't think I was going to win, and you could have knocked me down with a feather when I did. And I've got a 3-book deal at the moment from them, which is brilliant. I'm very pleased about that. And they're really good with things like publicity. It's just excellent. I'm really enjoying everything that's happened so far.
Good.
Yeah, big fan of Dragon Blade. Big fan. So, Phil, without spoiling book 1 completely, for those who haven't yet bothered to pause this video, go away, read your book and come back, can you give us a little teaser for book 2? Because that's one coming out in March, right?
In book 2, Gwen is going to get a little bit of a surprise. More of a shock, actually. She's going to get a shock, and it's going to be very difficult for her to cope with it to start with, and then very difficult for her to cope with it later on in the book as well. And there will be a battle, And then some of the characters that you met in book 1 might not survive.
Oh.
I won't say who.
I hate and I love that you're making me wait now until March with that little teeny tiny snippet. Oh, that's cruel but wonderful. And I just want to kind of echo something that Phil said in entering the competition for Dragonblade. My books are very much more the romance side of historical romance on a spectrum, and Phil's are much more the historical side. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, but mine are all swooning bonnets and, you know, they're not, you know, dived into historical fact, that's fine. And if you're like, oh gosh, there are no big romantic sweeps, but there is a romance, but it's much more about the history that it's set in, that's fine. Please do enter, because as you can see, it allows really great books like Phil to rise up to the surface. It allows so many people around the world to explore books like Phil that otherwise, you know, who knows, it would have been published eventually because it's that good. We just might not have got it so soon. And that's been a real pleasure for me to dive in. So Phil, very last question from me. Can't pick Arthur, Merlin or Gwen. Who is your favourite Arthurian legend character?
Ooh, from a proper Arthurian legend or in my book?
I'm going to say either. I'm going to allow either one.
To write, my favourite character to write is probably Morgana. I love writing a villain. I love making someone nasty.
I love it. Oh, fantastic. Well, thanks for chatting with me, Phil. I really, really enjoyed diving into your books and the history, not only of how you've written it, but what you're writing about. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Emily. Phil, do you want to speak a little bit about the competition?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a competition, and there will be several prizes, including a signed copy of the book. And the competition is, you need to go to Amazon for this, to the Amazon page for the book, and you need to go and have a look and read down the blurb and find out where Arthur's father, who's called Uther Pendragon, is when Arthur and Gwen go to see him. And you'll be able to enter the competition until the Friday the 11th of July. No, it's not July, it's February, isn't it? Sorry about that. Friday the 11th of February. And we'll draw the winners on Saturday. So until midnight on Friday the 11th, and we'll draw the winners on Saturday.
Great, thank you. So that was Phil's book launch. Thank you very much, Phil. Thank you very much, Emily. Thoroughly enjoyed your discussion, and it was a riveting conversation. Thank you so much. Now I know so much more about Britain and the Dark Ages, and I'm very, very interested in reading much more of Phil's outstanding novels. Thank you to our audience, who I hope will enjoy reading the Guinevere the Dragon Ring as much as myself and her many 5-star online reviewers. And thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.